Therefore, there's a system known as yoga. Yoga means to control the senses by higher consciousness. So the students in the Gurukul educational system are taught bodily control and sensual control. For example, until they finish their studies, they're strictly celibate. Now, this is something which you would hardly find nowadays in almost any other educational system. But the students are celibate. The reason being that according to the Gita philosophy, if a student remains celibate until about 20 or 25 years of age, his brain tissue is very powerful and he has very, very sharp memory so that he can retain knowledge perfectly. In fact, you'll find in the yoga system that there is a great stress placed on retaining the semina. It is said that if a man can retain his semen until the age of 25, that his power for recollection becomes very strong, his life duration becomes increased, and his intellectual faculties also become very advanced. But unfortunately, the present educational system teaches us exactly, it doesn't teach, but it leads us into the opposite situation, where there is unlimited pushings in terms of the genitals, in terms of the belly, and all of the other bodily functions. The result is that it is very difficult to perceive this anti-material particle unless one develops this quality of austerity. Another quality which is necessary is that one has to receive knowledge from the proper source. Nowadays, we find another interesting statistic is that 1 out of 10 teachers in the United States is attacked by the students, physically assaulted. So this means that students have lost any genuine respect for the teachers, because the teachers themselves are not the symbols of morality. So this is a very big problem. In the Gurukul system, the teachers are, first of all, they have to come up to a very high standard of morality. Now, this standard of morality is advised in all scriptures of the world. In the Bible, in the Quran, in the Jewish Torah, in the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures. That is considered to be one of the ideas behind real education. Education means to train up a first-class man. A first-class man or first-class human being is one who can understand what is the goal of life. The goal of life is not simply to push on one's activities for increasing one's temporary happiness, with the result that at the end of life one dies not really understanding who he is or where he came from or where he's meant to go. The present educational system doesn't really prepare us for the moment of death. But actually, according to the Vedas, the moment of death determines the future of the soul. Because after the soul or the anti-material particle leaves this body, it has to take shelter in another place. So that is determined by consciousness. As it is explained in the Gita, whatever your consciousness is thinking of at the time of death, that will determine the place that the soul goes to in its next birth. This is called transmigration of the soul. Just like in the Bible, it's mentioned that those who become very pious or religious or who love God with all their heart and soul, they go back to the kingdom of God. But if one does not develop that morality of love of God, then he's forced to go into hell. So a similar statement is there with a little bit of a change in the Bhagavad Gita, because it doesn't make simply the distinction between heaven or hell. It says that altogether there are 8,400,000 different species of life. Approximately it is given 900,000 are aquatics, 1 million are birds, 2 million are trees and plants, 3 million are four-legged animals, and 400,000 are humans, different human species. So what determines where the soul goes from one lifetime to another is the consciousness at the time of death. if one's activity has been more or less animalistic, by that we mean if your activities are more or less dominated by the actions of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, which are common to all species of life, then there's no guarantee that one will take a human birth. One may be plunged down into the animal species of life. So this is a very unfortunate situation. Just like if someone is very keen on having a lot of sex life, then why be born as a human being? It would be better to take one's birth as a pigeon, because as a pigeon, one can enjoy sex life 10 times an hour. There's a much bigger advantage. In the same way, if one is very eager for eating, then why take his birth as a human? Because there are animals that can eat tremendous quantities of food, far beyond any human being. Similarly, sleeping. There are bears in the northern part of the planet that hibernate for 6 months a year. So if someone is very much enjoys sleeping, then why be born as a human? So if you develop these type of activities to an extreme degree, then the result is that the soul, at the time of leaving this body, it goes, this is a very scientific process, the soul is carried on the subtle body. This is described in the Bhagavad Gita. The subtle body consists of mind, intelligence, and ego, also known as astral body. The gross body is made up of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Of course, they can be classified into different elements according to modern science, but these 5 are given in the Gita. So at the time of death, the gross body is left behind, and the subtle body, the mind, intelligence, and ego, carries the soul, according to the desires at the time of death, into another body. So a man who simply leads his whole life accumulating so many possessions of this material world, he has to give them all up. And if he's very much attached to these possessions, then he's forced into another body at the end of life, only to undergo again this cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. So these are the real problems of life that we're suffering from: birth, old age, disease, and death. But people are not getting this knowledge in any educational institution, how to get free from this cycle. Actually, the nature of the soul is that it's eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. No one can say that at every moment of their life they're full of knowledge, full of bliss, and eternal. If you study, for example, an ant that's moving along a piece of wood, and you put your finger in front of that ant, it tries to avoid the finger because he has a desire to remain alive. Now, everyone knows that their father has to die, their father's father died, his father died, and I'm also going to die. But no one wants to die, because that desire for not dying comes from the nature of the soul, which is eternal. Just like everyone wants to be happy, and no one likes to be miserable. And yet we find that there are so many miseries which are constantly coming. There are miseries caused by other living entities, like other students or teachers or father or mother or so many different persons. What to speak of insects and bugs, which are always biting, and other types of living entities are causing miseries. There are miseries due to this body because it gets sick. There are miseries due to the mind. So many miseries due to mental disorder. And there are miseries caused by natural disturbances. Too much rain, not enough rain, too much heat or too much cold. So actually these miseries are coming here within this world, and yet there's always a tendency on our part to try and change the situation to avoid these miseries. So this indicates that it's our nature to always be happy. Similarly, it's our nature to understand, just like tonight. We're meeting to try and understand more. And yet there are so many things, even simple bodily functions, which we have no knowledge of. Just like how many hairs are growing out of your head. That's not a very complicated question. And yet it's very hard for anybody to say exactly how many hairs are growing out of that. What to speak of more complex questions, like what is the source or origin of this universe? What is the nature of life? So these things we have a desire to know, and yet we find difficulty in knowing. So why? The difficulty is that the soul right now is not in its natural position. The soul is caught within a material body. And this material body is ignorant, It's full of suffering, and it's temporary. Just like a fish that's taken out of water. No matter what you do for that fish, it's not going to be satisfied until you place it back in its natural environment. In the same way, the soul has a natural environment, which is actually the spiritual world or the kingdom of God.